in which our protagonists, Anna and Levine, finally meet, and in which one of their tales comes to an end. Chapter 2. "So please call on the Bowles," Kitty said to her husband when he came to see her at 11 o'clock before going out. "I know you're dining at the club. Papa signed you up. And what are you doing in the morning?" "I'm just going to visit Katavasov," answered Levine. "Why so early?" "He promised to introduce me to Metrov. I'd like to discuss my work with him. He's a well-known Petersburg scholar," said Levine. "Yes, wasn't it his article that you praised so much?" "Well, and then?" said Kitty. "I may also go to the court on my sister's business." "And to the concert?" she asked. "As if I'd go alone." "No, do go. They perform new things. You were so interested, I wouldn't miss it." "Well, in any case, I'll call in at home before dinner," he said, looking at his watch. "Put on your frock coat so that you can call on Countess Bowl on the way." "But is it absolutely necessary?" "Oh, absolutely. He called on us. But what will it cost you? You'll go, talk about the weather for 5 minutes, get up, and leave. Well, you won't believe it, but I'm so unaccustomed to these things that it makes me ashamed. How is it? A stranger comes, sits down, stays for no reason, bothers them, upsets himself, and then leaves." Kitty laughed. "You paid calls when you were a bachelor, didn't you?" she said. "I did, but I was always ashamed. And now I'm so unaccustomed to it that, my God, I'd rather go 2 days without dinner than pay this call. Such shame. I keep thinking they'll be offended and say, 'Why come for no reason?' No, they won't be offended. I can answer for that," said Kitty, looking into his face and laughing. She took his hand. "Well, goodbye. Please go." He was just about to kiss her hand and leave when she stopped him. "Kostya, you know, I only have 50 rubles left." "Well, then I'll go and get some from the bank." "How much?" he said, with an expression of displeasure familiar to her. "No, wait." She held on to his hand. "Let's talk. This bothers me. I don't think I spent on anything unnecessary, but the money just goes. We're doing something wrong." "Not at all," he said, clearing his throat and looking at her from under the eyebrows. She knew that clearing of his throat. It was a sign that he was strongly displeased. Not with her, but with himself. He was indeed displeased. Not that a lot of money had been spent, but that he was reminded of something which he, knowing that things were not right, had wished to forget. "I've told Sokolov to sell the wheat and take money in advance for the mill. In any case, we'll have money." "No, but I'm afraid it generally is too much." "Not at all. Not at all," he repeated. "Well, goodbye, darling." "No, really. I'm sometimes so sorry I listened to Mama. It was so good in the country, and here I've been worrying you all out, and we're spending money." "Not at all. Not at all. Not once since I've been married have I said it would have been better otherwise than it is." "Truly?" she said, looking into his eyes. He had said it without thinking, just to comfort her, But when he glanced at her and saw those dear, trustful eyes fixed questioningly on him, he repeated the same thing from the bottom of his heart. I'm decidedly forgetting her, he thought, and he remembered what so soon awaited them. Soon now. How do you feel? He whispered, taking both her hands. I've thought it so many times that now I don't think or know anything. And you're not afraid? She smiled scornfully. Not a bit, she said. So if anything happens, I'm at Katavasov's. No, nothing will happen. Don't even think of it. I'll go for a stroll on the boulevard with Papa. We'll stop at Dolly's. I'll be expecting you before dinner. Ah, yes. Do you know that Dolly's situation is becoming quite impossible? She's in debt all around, and she has no money. Yesterday I talked with Mama and Arseny. So she called Prince Leov, her sister's husband. And we decided to set him and you on Stiva. This is quite impossible. One can't talk to Papa about it. But if you and he... But what can we do? Asked Levine. Still, while you're at Arseny's, talk to him. He'll tell you what we decided. Well, with Arseny I'll agree to everything beforehand. I'll call on him. By the way, if I do go to the concert, I'll go with Natalie. Well, goodbye. At the porch, Kuzma, the old servant from his bachelor days who was handling their town arrangements, stopped him. Beau, this was the left shaft horse brought from the country, has been reshod, but he still limps, he said. What are your orders? At the beginning of their life in Moscow, Levine had concerned himself with the horses he brought from the country. He had wanted to arrange that part as well and as cheaply as possible, but it turned out that keeping his own horses was more expensive than hiring, and they hired cabs anyway. Send for the horse doctor. It may be a sore. Well, and for Katerina Alexandrovna? Asked Kuzma. Levine was no longer struck now, as he had been at the beginning of their life in Moscow, that to go from Vodvezhenka to Sivsevrajek, it was necessary to hitch a pair of strong horses to a heavy carriage, take that carriage less than a quarter of a mile through snowy mush, and let it stand there for 4 hours, having paid 5 rubles for it. Now it seemed natural to him. Tell the cabby to bring a second pair for our carriage, he said. Yes, sir. And having solved so simply and easily, thanks to town conditions, a difficulty which in the country would have called for so much personal effort and attention, Levine went out on the porch, hailed a cab, got into it, and drove to Nikitskaya. On the way he no longer thought about money, but reflected on how he was going to make the acquaintance of a Petersburg scholar, a specialist in sociology, and talk to him about his book. Only during his very first days in Moscow had Levine been struck by those unproductive but inevitable expenses, so strange for a country dweller, that were demanded of him on all sides. Now he had grown used to them. What had happened to him in this respect was what they say happens with drunkards. The first glass is a steak, the second a snake, and from the third on it's all little birdies. When Levine changed the first 100-ruble note to buy liveries for his footman and hall porter, he calculated these liveries, totally useless, but inevitable and necessary, judging by the princess and Kitty's astonishment at his hint that they might be dispensed with, would cost as much as 2 summer workers, meaning about 300 work-days from Easter to Advent, each one a day of hard work from early morning to late in the evening. And that 100-ruble note still went down like a stake. But the next one broke to buy provisions for a family dinner that had cost 28 rubles, though it had called up in Levine the recollection that 28 rubles meant about 72 bushels of oats, which, with much sweating and groaning, had been mowed, bound, carted, threshed, winnowed, sifted, and bagged. This next one, all the same, had gone a little more easily, and now the notes he broke had all the same ceased to call up such thoughts and flew off like little birdies. Whether the labor spent in acquiring money corresponded to the pleasure afforded by what was bought with it was a long-lost consideration. The economic consideration that there was a certain price below which a certain kind of grain could not be sold was also forgotten. His rye, the piece of which he had insisted on for such a long time, was sold at 50 kopecks less per measure than had been offered a month earlier. Even the consideration that with such expenses it would be impossible to get through the year without going into debt no longer had any significance. Only one thing was required, to have money in the bank, without asking where it came from, so as always to know how to pay for the next day's beef. And so far he had observed that consideration. He had always had money in the bank, but now the money in the bank had come to an end, and he did not quite know where to get more. It was this that upset him for a moment when Kitty reminded him about money. But he had no time to think of it. He drove on, thinking about Katavasov and the impending meeting with Metrov. If you enjoy this format, please leave a like and subscribe and return tomorrow for the next chapter.